If you don't want to go to the nursing home, get a job, Mother. I can't keep supporting you. Those words came from my son Bradley as he stood over me with his arms crossed. His wife Amanda smirked from the doorway. I had been caring for their 3 children, cooking every meal, scrubbing every floor, but they treated me like dead weight. I stood up with a calm smile. I'll be out by this afternoon. Their jaws dropped open. I walked upstairs and began packing my belongings. 1 hour later, a black Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Through the window, Bradley watched a distinguished, silver-haired man step out. My new husband, Gerald Whitmore. I came down those stairs carrying my suitcase, and Bradley and Amanda stood frozen like statues in the hallway. My son found his voice first, demanding to know who this stranger was and what on earth was happening. I set down my bag and introduced them to Gerald Whitmore. We had married 2 weeks earlier at City Hall, I explained, keeping my voice steady and pleasant. Amanda's face went from pale to crimson. You got married? When? How? 6 months ago, I began. I started volunteering at the public library. You remember, Bradley, you said I was wasting my time reading books when I should have been watching the children more. Well, that's where I met Gerald. He was there every Tuesday and Thursday, browsing the classic literature section. We both reached for the same copy of Steinbeck. Gerald smiled at the memory. Your mother has exquisite taste in books. We started talking, I continued. Just conversations at first, about novels, about life, about what we'd lost. Gerald's wife had passed away 3 years before my husband died. We understood each other's grief. Then the conversations became walks in the park, coffee at that little cafe on Maple Street, and somewhere along the way we fell in love. Bradley sputtered. But you never said anything. You never told us. I looked at my son directly. You monitored my phone. You checked my email. You controlled my schedule down to the minute. I couldn't tell you because you wouldn't have allowed it. You wanted me here, available, taking care of your household while you and Amanda lived your lives. That's not fair, Amanda protested weakly. Isn't it? I asked. When was the last time either of you asked how I was doing? When I was sad? When I was lonely? You saw a live-in housekeeper and babysitter, not a person with her own needs and dreams. Gerald stepped forward and gently took my suitcase. Shall we go, darling? Wait, Bradley said, his voice rising. You can't just leave. Who's going to watch the kids? Who's going to cook dinner and do the laundry and take Emma to soccer practice? I met his eyes without flinching. You're their father. Amanda is their mother. Perhaps it's time you both tried actually parenting your own children. Gerald opened the door for me with old-fashioned courtesy, and I walked through it without looking back. As we drove away in his Mercedes, I watched Bradley's house disappear in the side mirror. I felt lighter than I had in 3 years. The drive to Gerald's home took 20 minutes, winding through tree-lined streets to a neighborhood I had only seen from a distance. His house was a beautiful colonial with white columns and a wraparound porch. Gardens bloomed on both sides of the walkway, roses and hydrangeas in full summer glory. Welcome home, Gerald said, squeezing my hand. Inside, the house was even more impressive. Hardwood floors gleamed. A crystal chandelier hung in the foyer. Everything spoke of quiet wealth and good taste. Gerald showed me to a bedroom suite on the 2nd floor, with its own bathroom and a window seat overlooking the garden. I thought you might like your own space, he said. We're married, of course, but I'm old-fashioned. I believe a lady should have her sanctuary. I was touched by his thoughtfulness. That evening we had dinner in his formal dining room. He'd prepared chicken marsala and roasted vegetables, insisting I relax while he cooked. We talked about books, about travel, about the lives we'd lived before finding each other. He toasted our future with wine from his cellar. "To new beginnings," he said, "and to leaving the past behind." Everything felt perfect. Too perfect, perhaps, but I pushed that thought away. I deserved happiness. I deserved kindness, after years of being treated as invisible. That night, I unpacked my belongings in the beautiful bedroom. Most of what I owned fit in one suitcase. 3 years with Bradley had taught me to live small, to take up as little space as possible. Now I had this entire suite, this entire life. As I arranged my few possessions in the dresser, I noticed one of the drawers was locked. I tried it twice, thinking it was stuck, but no, it had a keyhole. How odd. Why would a bedroom dresser have a locked drawer? Curiosity nudged at me. I glanced at the door, heard Gerald downstairs washing dishes, and made a decision. I needed to know what was in that drawer. Not because I didn't trust my husband, but because something felt off. A locked drawer in the room he'd given me specifically. What was he hiding? I went downstairs quietly and found Gerald's study. He'd shown it to me earlier. A masculine room with leather chairs and shelves full of books. I searched his desk carefully, looking for keys. In the top drawer, I found a ring with several small keys. I took it and hurried back upstairs. The third key opened the locked drawer. Inside were papers, legal documents. I pulled them out with shaking hands and began to read. The first was a restraining order from a woman named Susan Palmer against Gerald Whitmore, dated 2 years ago. The allegations made my stomach turn. Financial control, isolation from family and friends, coercive behavior, threats. The second restraining order was from a woman named Dorothy Chen. Different year, same pattern of accusations. The third was from someone named Margaret Hayes. Similar claims: psychological abuse, controlling all finances, preventing her from leaving the house. 3 different women, 3 restraining orders, all against the man I had just married. My hands went cold. The papers fell to the floor. Who was Gerald Whitmore? Who had I really married? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the beautiful bedroom with its garden view and tried to make sense of what I'd found. 3 restraining orders. 3 women claiming Gerald had controlled and abused them. But he seemed so kind, so gentle, so considerate. Was it possible they were lying? That they were vindictive ex-girlfriends, as he might claim? But 3 of them? 3 separate women with identical stories? Morning came too soon. I heard Gerald moving around downstairs, the smell of coffee drifting up. I needed to act normal, to not reveal what I'd discovered until I understood more. I dressed carefully and went down to breakfast. "Good morning, darling," Gerald said with a warm smile. He'd set the table with fresh fruit and pastries from the bakery. "How did you sleep?" "Wonderfully," I lied. "This bed is so comfortable. I'm glad." He poured my coffee exactly the way I liked it. "I've been thinking. That old phone of yours is so outdated. I took the liberty of getting you a new one. Top of the line. I've already programmed in all the numbers you'll need." He handed me a sleek new phone. My old phone, the one with all my contacts, with Patricia's number and the library's number and years of messages, was gone. "Where's my old phone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "I recycled it," he said. "You don't need it anymore. This one is so much better. See? I've put in my number, the house number, emergency services, everything important. Everything he wanted me to have access to," I realized. "Nothing else." "That's very thoughtful," I said, my heart sinking. "But I had some photos on my old phone, memories." "Oh, don't worry. I transferred everything important. He smiled and changed the subject. What would you like to do today? We could tour the gardens, or I could show you the rest of the house. Actually, I was thinking I might go to the library. I'd like to let them know I'm settling in, that I'll be back to volunteer soon. His smile faltered for just a second. A brief shadow crossed his face, so quick I almost missed it. Then it was back, bright and cheerful. The library? Darling, you don't need to volunteer anymore. You have me now. We'll spend time together. Why do you need anyone else? The words were spoken kindly, but there was something underneath them, a command disguised as concern. I enjoy volunteering, I said carefully. I like helping people find books. It gives me purpose. Your purpose is here now, with me. His hand covered mine on the table, warm and firm. We're married, Anahi. We should focus on us, not outside distractions. Distractions. That's what he called my interests, my connections to the outside world. Distractions from him. Of course, I said, pulling my hand away gently. You're right. I just thought. You thought you needed your old life, but this is your new life. With me, just us. He leaned forward. Isn't that enough? It is, I said, though my chest felt tight. Of course it is. The rest of the day, I felt his eyes on me constantly. When I tried to read in the living room, he sat nearby. When I walked in the garden, he walked with me. Not beside me, but slightly behind, as if hurting me. When I mentioned wanting to call my old friend Patricia, just to let her know I was all right, he had a ready answer. Patricia called yesterday, he said. While you were unpacking. I spoke with her. My heart jumped. You did? What did she say? She seemed negative, honestly, asking suspicious questions about me, about our marriage. That woman never did like seeing you happy, did she? Always a bit jealous, I thought. But that wasn't Patricia at all. Patricia was the kindest person I knew, supportive of everything good in my life. She would never be negative or jealous, which meant Gerald was lying. And if he was lying about Patricia, what else was he lying about? I need to use the bathroom, I said, standing up. Of course, darling. Take your time. I went upstairs and locked myself in the bathroom. My breath came in short gasps. I turned on the water to cover any sound and tried to think I needed to reach someone, to tell someone what was happening. But he'd taken my phone. He was monitoring my movements. He was isolating me, just like those restraining orders said. I had to confront him about those papers. I had to know the truth. That evening at dinner, I gathered my courage. Gerald, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I found some papers in the dresser upstairs, restraining orders. He set down his fork very carefully. His face remained calm, but his eyes went cold for a heartbeat before warming again. You went through my things? The drawer was in the room you gave me, I said. I wasn't snooping. I was just putting away my clothes. He sighed deeply, the picture of wounded dignity. Darling, I should have told you. I should have been honest from the start. Those women, those vindictive, cruel women, they were gold diggers, every one of them. I dated them briefly, and when I realized they only wanted my money, I ended things. They tried to destroy me. They filed false restraining orders, made up terrible lies, tried to take everything I'd worked for. But 3 different women? I asked. 3 vindictive gold diggers, he corrected. It's a pattern, sadly. Lonely widower with money attracts the wrong kind of attention. But you're different, Anahi. You're genuine. You're real. That's why I fell in love with you. His hand reached across the table for mine. You believe me, don't you? I wanted to believe him. I had nowhere else to go. Bradley had made it clear I wasn't welcome in his home. I had no money of my own, no resources. If I left Gerald, where would I go? Back to begging Bradley for a roof over my head? "I believe you," I said softly. That night, he brought up my clothing. "You know, darling, that dress you wore today. It's a bit revealing for a woman our age, don't you think?" I looked down at the simple sundress I'd worn. It had cap sleeves and fell below my knees. There was nothing revealing about it. "I just think you'd look more dignified in something more appropriate," he continued, "more elegant. I picked up a few things for you today while you were resting. Let me show you." He'd bought me clothes. Long-sleeved blouses in muted colors, shapeless dresses that hung like sacks, cardigans in drab grays and browns. Nothing bright, nothing that might draw attention, nothing that made me feel like myself. "These are lovely," I lied. "Thank you. I want people to respect you," he said, "to see what I see. A dignified, elegant woman, not some old lady trying to look young." His words stung like slaps, though his tone remained gentle, loving even. He was remaking me into something else, someone invisible, someone he could control completely. I went to bed that night feeling trapped, and the feeling only grew worse the next morning. I woke to find him in my room, sitting in the chair by the window, watching me sleep. "Good morning," he said pleasantly. "I hope I didn't startle you. I just like watching you rest. You look so peaceful." It wasn't romantic. It was terrifying. How long had he been sitting there? What else did he do while I slept? I got up and went downstairs to find a woman in the kitchen, a sturdy-looking person in her 40s, wearing an apron. "You must be Anahi," the woman said. "I'm Brenda. Mr. Whitmore hired me to help around the house." "Oh," I said, surprised. "That's nice. Welcome." "Brenda will be handling the housework," Gerald said from behind me. "I don't want you to strain yourself, darling. And Brenda can also accompany you if you need to go anywhere, for safety. You're not used to this neighborhood, for safety." But what he meant was for surveillance. Brenda was here to watch me, to report my movements, to make sure I didn't leave without permission. That afternoon, I asked if I could walk to the corner store for some fresh air. "Of course," Gerald said. "Brenda will go with you." We walked the 3 blocks together, Brenda chatting about the weather and her children. At the store, I tried to slip away to the pharmacy counter, to ask for help, to get a message out somehow. But Brenda stayed close, always within earshot. In desperation, I grabbed a piece of paper and wrote quickly, "I'm Anahi Whitmore. I'm being held against my will at 847 Elmwood Drive. Please call police." I folded it small, and when the pharmacist was counting out aspirin I didn't need, I pressed it into his hand. His eyes widened. He nodded slightly and pocketed the note. Hope bloomed in my chest. Someone knew. Someone would help. That evening Gerald was in an excellent mood. He made my favorite meal, played soft music, poured wine, and then, casually, he mentioned his good friend who owned the pharmacy chain. "Charlie runs several locations," Gerald said. "Great guy. We play golf every Saturday. He called me today, actually. Said you were at his store." My blood turned to ice. "Funny thing," Gerald continued, his voice still light and pleasant. "Charlie found a note. A disturbing note from someone claiming to be held against their will. Can you imagine? Who would write something like that?" He looked at me directly, his eyes hard despite his smile. I stammered something about not knowing, about it being strange. "Very strange," he agreed. "Because I explained to Charlie that my new wife has been having some confusion lately. Memory issues. Paranoia even. The doctors said it might happen at her age." And Charlie understood completely. He was worried about you, darling. So was I. There was no friend at the pharmacy. Or there was, and Gerald had already turned him into an ally. Either way, my call for help had backfired spectacularly. Now Gerald thought I was even more desperate, even more in need of control. After dinner, he brought me tea. "To help you sleep," he said. "You've seemed so anxious lately." I took the cup with shaking hands. I pretended to drink, but didn't. After he left, I poured it into a potted plant. The next morning, that plant was wilting, its leaves turning brown. He was drugging me. That tea wasn't for sleep. It was to make me confused, to make me seem mentally unstable, to prove his lies about my supposed dementia. I understood then the full scope of his plan. He would drug me, isolate me, destroy my credibility, and then have me committed somewhere, a nursing home or psychiatric facility where no one would believe my claims of abuse. He'd done it before. Those 3 restraining orders, those 3 women, they'd tried to escape and he'd destroyed their reputations first. Now, he was doing it to me. But I knew his pattern. And knowing meant I could fight back. I began pretending. I drank the drugged tea but immediately went to the bathroom and made myself throw it up. It was horrible but necessary. Then I'd stumble around a bit, act confused, let him think the drugs were working. During the day, when he thought I was foggy and compliant, I stayed sharp. I watched everything. I memorized his routines, his passwords, his habits. I played the confused elderly wife, while my mind stayed clear and calculating. One afternoon, while pretending to nap in a drugged haze, I heard him on the phone in his study. "Yes, Dr. Hayes," he was saying. "I think it's time for an evaluation. My wife has been showing signs of dementia, confusion, paranoia, memory loss. I'm very concerned. Could you come to the house? I don't want to upset her by taking her to an office." He was arranging for a psychiatric evaluation, with a doctor who was clearly his friend, who would diagnose whatever Gerald wanted him to diagnose. And once I was labeled mentally incompetent, he could do anything. Commit me, take control of any assets I had, erase me completely. I had maybe a week before that evaluation, a week to find a way out. But I was being watched constantly. Brenda followed me everywhere. Gerald monitored my every move. I had no phone, no computer access, no way to reach the outside world. And even if I could, who would believe me? He'd already convinced everyone that I was confused and unstable. Then I thought of Bradley. My son had treated me terribly, but surely if he knew I was in danger, he'd help. Blood was blood, after all. And he'd seemed shocked when I left with Gerald. Maybe, just maybe, he'd worried about me since then. In the middle of the night, I crept downstairs to Gerald's study. I knew he kept the door locked, but I'd seen him hide a key under a particular book on the hallway shelf. I retrieved it, hands shaking, and unlocked the study door. His computer sat on the desk, password protected. But I'd watched him type it in from a distance, had pieced together the characters. I typed carefully. RUTH 1952. His first wife's name and birth year. The screen unlocked. I opened his email and started typing to Bradley. But my fingers were trembling, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would wake Gerald. I typed quickly. "Bradley? It's Mom. I'm in trouble. Gerald isn't who I thought. He's controlling, dangerous. I found restraining orders from other women. He's drugging me, trying to make me seem mentally ill. Please help me. Please believe me. The address is..." But in my panic, I clicked the wrong button. Instead of sending it from my supposed email account, I sent it from Gerald's account, to Gerald's sent folder. I realized my mistake immediately and deleted it, but the damage was done. There was a record, a draft, evidence I'd been in his computer. I shut everything down and crept back upstairs, my heart hammering. Maybe he wouldn't notice. Maybe I deleted it thoroughly enough. The next morning, Gerald was cheerful at breakfast, and then the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," he said, standing. "Ah, I think that's your son. I invited him over. I thought it might cheer you up to see family." My heart leaped. Bradley was here. Maybe my email had somehow gotten through. Maybe he'd come to rescue me. Gerald opened the door, and Bradley walked in, looking uncomfortable. He saw me and gave a small, awkward smile. "Hi, Mom." "Bradley," I said, starting toward him. But Gerald's hand on my shoulder stopped me. "Come into the living room," Gerald said warmly. "We need to talk." We all sat down, me on the sofa, Gerald beside me, Bradley in the armchair across from us. And then Gerald began to speak, his voice full of concerned sadness. "Bradley, I'm so glad you could come. I'm worried about your mother. She's been having some episodes. Confusion, paranoia. She's been accusing me of terrible things, things that simply aren't true." "Mom?" Bradley looked at me with concern. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said quickly. "Bradley, listen to me. He's lying. He's been isolating me, drugging me, trying to make me seem mentally ill. I found restraining orders." Gerald interrupted smoothly. "See, this is what I mean. She found some old legal documents related to business disputes and misinterpreted them. She's been having trouble distinguishing reality from fantasy." "That's not true," I insisted, hearing my voice rise, hearing how desperate I sounded. "Bradley, I need you to believe me. He's dangerous. He's done this to other women." "Mom, calm down," Bradley said, and there was pity in his eyes. Not belief, pity. Gerald pulled out a folder from the side table. "I brought this to show you, Bradley. Medical records. Your mother was diagnosed with early-stage dementia 6 months ago. She didn't tell you because she was in denial, but it's progressing faster than the doctors expected." I stared at the papers he was showing my son. Medical records with my name, with a diagnosis I'd never received, from doctors I'd never seen. All forgeries, all lies. But they looked official, complete with letterhead and signatures. "I never saw any doctor," I said. "Those are fake. Bradley, please." The doctors also noted increased agitation when confronted with her diagnosis, Gerald continued sadly. "She's been refusing to take her medications. I've been trying to help, but she's resistant." "What medications?" I demanded. "I'm not taking any medications because I don't need any. I'm not sick." "This is exactly what the doctors warned me about," Gerald said to Bradley. "She doesn't recognize that she needs help." Bradley looked at me with such sadness, such concern. "Mom, maybe you should listen to Gerald. Maybe you should see a doctor, get properly evaluated." "I've never needed a doctor," I said, but I could hear how frantic I sounded, how unreasonable. Everything I said to defend myself made me seem more unstable. Gerald had set the trap perfectly. "Bradley," Gerald said gently, "I think we need to consider professional care, a nice facility where she can get round-the-clock supervision and proper treatment. There's an excellent place about 30 minutes from here. Memory care specialists. I've already contacted them. A nursing home." He was going to put me in a nursing home, the very thing I'd fled from Bradley's house to avoid. And now my own son was nodding along, agreeing that it might be for the best. "Mom," Bradley said, reaching for my hand, "we just want what's best for you. If you're having memory problems—" "I'm not," I said, pulling my hand away. "I'm being set up. Can't you see that? He's manipulating you, just like he's manipulating me." But Bradley just looked at Gerald with sympathy. "This must be so hard for you." "It is," Gerald said, and he actually managed to make his eyes well up with tears. "I love her so much. I just want her to be safe and healthy." Bradley left promising to research facilities, to help Gerald find the right place for me. My own son, convinced I was losing my mind, ready to lock me away. After Bradley drove off, Gerald turned to me with a smile that never reached his eyes. "That went well, don't you think?" I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in. That night, Gerald brought me tea again. "To help you sleep, darling. You had such an upsetting day." I took it with numb fingers. He watched me drink it this time, standing there until I swallowed every drop. I couldn't refuse without confirming his lies about my resistance to medication. The moment he left, I stumbled to the bathroom and tried to throw it up, but some of it had already absorbed. The room began to spin. My thoughts grew fuzzy at the edges. I made it back to bed before the drug fully took hold. I woke the next morning groggy and disoriented. Lost time. Lost control. He was winning. Over the next 2 days, Gerald increased the drugs. I was foggy more than clear now. I'd try to think, to plan, but the thoughts would slip away like water through my fingers. I heard him making more calls to Dr. Hayes, to facilities, to Bradley. Then, on the 3rd day, something broke through my medicated haze. It was Brenda. She was cleaning my bathroom, and I saw her face in the mirror. She looked guilty, ashamed. I gathered what mental clarity I had left. "Brenda," I whispered when Gerald was outside in the garden, "please, you know this isn't right." She froze, washcloth in hand. "I don't know what you mean. He's done this before," I said, to other women. "You know that, don't you?" Her face crumpled. She looked like she might cry. "I needed the job," she whispered back. "I've got 2 kids, single mom. The money he pays, it's twice what I'd make anywhere else. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Help me stop him," I said, reaching for her hand. "Before he does it to someone else. Before another woman ends up where I am." She pulled away, conflicted, but there was something in her eyes, a crack in her loyalty to Gerald. "There's a safe," she finally whispered, barely audible. "In the basement. He keeps files there. Documents on everyone, including me. He's got something on all of us. That's how he keeps us in line. Can you help me get into it?" She shook her head. "I don't know the combination. He'd fire me. Or worse." "Just tell me where it is," I pressed. "Please, Brenda. For your daughters. What if someone does this to them someday? Wouldn't you want someone to help?" She closed her eyes. Basement. Behind the bookshelf on the east wall. The bookshelf pulls out. The safe is built into the wall behind it. That night I pretended to drink the tea but held it in my mouth. The moment Gerald left, I spit it out. It wasn't much, but it gave me a few hours of clarity, a few hours to act. I waited until 2 in the morning, listened to make sure Gerald was asleep, then crept downstairs to the basement. The basement was finished, with paneled walls and carpet. The bookshelf Brenda mentioned was full of old encyclopedias. I pulled on it carefully, and it swung out on hidden hinges. Behind it, set into the wall, was a safe with an electronic keypad. I had no idea what the combination might be. I tried his birthday. Nothing. I tried Ruth's birthday, his first wife. Nothing. I tried random combinations, knowing that too many wrong attempts might trigger an alarm. Then I remembered something. When I'd first unlocked his computer, the password had been Ruth's name and birth year. Maybe he used her information for everything, some twisted memorial to the wife he'd probably killed. I tried her death date. I'd seen it on papers in the locked drawer upstairs. August 29th, 1998. 082998. Too many digits. I tried just the month and day. 0829. The safe clicked, and the door swung open. Inside the safe were files. So many files. I pulled them out with shaking hands and started reading by the dim light from the hallway. The first file was labeled Susan Palmer. Inside were financial records showing Gerald had systematically drained her bank accounts after they married. There were forged documents giving him power of attorney, photos of her looking drugged and disheveled, clearly staged, medical records claiming she was mentally unstable, and a restraining order she'd filed, which he'd fought with expensive lawyers until she ran out of money to fight back. The second file was Dorothy Chen's. The same pattern. Marriage, financial control, staged evidence of mental illness, restraining order, legal battles that bankrupted her. Margaret Hayes. Same thing. Caroline Foster. Victoria Sanchez. Emily Marshall. 6 women total. 6 women he'd done this to. Married them. Isolated them. Drugged them. Stolen from them. And destroyed their credibility when they tried to escape. And there, at the back, was a file labeled Ruth Whitmore, his first wife. The death certificate listed her cause of death as accidental fall downstairs. But behind it was a private investigator's report from her sister who'd suspected foul play. Photos of Ruth from weeks before her death, showing bruises on her arms. A statement from a neighbor who'd heard arguing the night she died. The PI believed Gerald had pushed her, but there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute. He'd killed his first wife and gotten away with it, and then he'd spent years finding vulnerable women, marrying them, controlling them, destroying them. Behind all those files was one more, my name on the tab, Anahi Whitmore. Inside were forged medical records claiming I had dementia, edited emails that made me sound paranoid and irrational, photos of me taken without my knowledge, captured from angles that made me look confused or unstable, and at the very back, commitment papers for a psychiatric facility called Meadowbrook Manor, pre-signed by Dr. Hayes, dated for tomorrow. Tomorrow. They were going to commit me tomorrow. I heard a sound upstairs. A door opening. Gerald was awake. I grabbed as many papers as I could, stuffed them inside my nightgown, and carefully closed the safe. Pushed the bookshelf back into place. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely function. Footsteps on the stairs. He was coming down. I darted behind the furnace, pressing myself into the shadows, praying he wouldn't see me. Gerald came down the basement stairs slowly. I could see his silhouette in the doorway. He stood there for a long moment, and I held my breath until my lungs burned. Then he called out, his voice soft and menacing. "Looking for something, darling?" He knew. Somehow he knew I was down here. I stayed silent, frozen behind the furnace. "I heard you," he said, walking further into the basement. The floorboards creak. "Did you think I wouldn't? Did you think I'd just let you snoop through my things?" He walked past the furnace toward the bookshelf, ran his hand along it, checking if it had been moved. "You found the safe, didn't you? You found my insurance policy." His voice was cold now, all pretense of kindness gone. "Those files keep everyone in line. The women I dealt with, the lawyers I pay, the doctors who sign my forms, everyone who might cause trouble. I have something on all of them." He turned, and his eyes locked on my hiding spot in the shadows. "Come out, Anahi. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I stepped out slowly, the papers crackling against my chest under my nightgown. He heard it, smiled without warmth. You took papers. How enterprising. But who are you going to show them to? Who's going to believe a confused old woman with dementia? People will believe the truth, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The truth, he laughed. The truth is, whatever I say it is. I have money, lawyers, doctors, connections. You have nothing. You're nobody. A sad, mentally ill widow who made the mistake of marrying the wrong man. Brenda appeared at the top of the basement stairs, drawn by the noise. She saw me cornered, saw Gerald's face, and I saw her make a choice. Mr. Whitmore, she said carefully, maybe we should all calm down. Brenda, go home, Gerald said without looking at her. This doesn't concern you. She hesitated, then said something I'll never forget. I think it does. I think this concerns all of us you've manipulated. He turned to her, his face darkening. You're fired. Get out of my house. Fine, she said, but I'm calling the police about what I've seen here. You'll do no such thing, Gerald said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I know where your daughters go to school. I know where you live. I know every vulnerable thing about you. So you'll go home, you'll forget what you saw, and you'll never speak of this again. Or I'll destroy you and your children. Do you understand? Brenda went pale. For a moment, I thought she'd cave, would run away out of fear for her girls, and I wouldn't have blamed her. But she surprised us both. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling 911. Right now. Gerald lunged toward her, but she was already at the top of the stairs, already dialing. He turned back to me with cold fury. This isn't over. I'll still have you committed tomorrow. No one will believe anything you say. You're mentally incompetent, remember? I have all the paperwork, all the proof. He was right. Even with the files I'd stolen, even with Brenda's support, he had an entire system built around his lies. Doctors, lawyers, judges he'd paid off or compromised. I was one old woman with papers that could be dismissed as confused misunderstandings. I felt hope dying in my chest. Then Brenda called down, The police are on their way. But there's someone else I called first. Someone who's been looking for evidence against you for a long time. Gerald's face went white. 20 minutes later, the house was full of people, police officers, and a woman I recognized from the voicemail on my old phone. Dorothy Chen, one of the women from the restraining orders. Except she wasn't just a victim. She pulled out a badge. Dorothy Chen, private investigator, licensed in 3 states. She looked at Gerald with steel in her eyes. I've been building a case against you for 2 years, since you drove my sister to suicide with your abuse. She was one of your victims, one whose file isn't in that safe because she's dead. Killed herself after you destroyed her reputation so thoroughly that no one would hire her, no one would believe her, no one would help her. Gerald's lawyer mask was slipping. I don't know what you're talking about. Dorothy turned to me. When you didn't return my call, I kept watching. I saw Brenda leave today in distress. I followed her, talked to her. She told me everything. Then we found out Sheila from the library had received some disturbing photos in the volunteer email account. Photos you sent, Anahi, before Gerald caught you. I'd forgotten about that. In my panic that day in Gerald's study, I'd sent copies of some documents to the library's shared email, hoping someone would see them. Sheila called us, Dorothy continued. She was worried. And when we pieced together what she'd seen with what Brenda told us, we had enough for a warrant. The police had already gone down to the basement. They came back up with the safe's contents, all the files, all the evidence of Gerald's pattern of abuse. But Gerald just smiled coldly. I have the best lawyers in the state. This will never stick. That safe was illegally searched. My wife has dementia and broke into my private files. I was trying to protect her from herself. One of the officers started reading him his rights anyway. But I knew Gerald was probably correct. He had resources, connections, money. He'd find a way out of this. He always had. As they led him out in handcuffs, he looked back at me. "This isn't over, Anahi. I'll be out on bail by morning, and then we'll see who everyone believes. The respected businessman, or the crazy old woman." The officers took him away. Dorothy sat with me at the kitchen table while they processed the scene. "He's right, isn't he?" I said quietly. "He'll get out. He'll come after me. He has too much power." Dorothy took my hand. "He has money. But we have something more important now. We have a pattern, 6 victims willing to testify. And you, the one who got evidence that proves he's been doing this for years, with all of us together, we can stop him." But even as she said it, I wondered if it was true. Money bought so much in this world. Justice. Lawyers kept saying, but what they meant was the best outcome money could buy. That night, I stayed at Dorothy's house. I couldn't go back to Gerald's mansion. I had nowhere else to go. Dorothy set me up in her guest room and brought me tea. Real tea, not drugged, and the simple kindness of it made me cry. "We'll fight him," Dorothy promised, "together." But I'd seen Gerald's files. I knew how many people he'd destroyed, and I didn't know if I was strong enough to be the one who finally stopped him. Dorothy's house was small and cluttered with case files, nothing like Gerald's mansion. But it was safe. That first night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks, knowing no one was watching me, drugging me, planning my destruction. In the morning, Dorothy laid out the reality of what we were facing. "Gerald made bail within 6 hours," she said over coffee. $250,000 paid in cash. He's out, and his lawyers are already filing motions to dismiss. "What kind of motions?" I asked. "Everything. Claiming the search was illegal. Claiming you broke into his safe while mentally unstable. Claiming I've been harassing him for years due to a grudge. They're good lawyers. The best. So, we've already lost." "No." Dorothy pulled out a thick folder. "I've been investigating him for 2 years. I have statements from all 6 women he victimized. I have financial records showing patterns of theft. I have testimony from people he's bribed and blackmailed. It's not enough on its own. Each piece is circumstantial. But together, with the evidence from the safe, we can build a case. But it'll take time," I said. "Months. Maybe years. And in the meantime, he's free." Dorothy's phone rang. She answered it, listened, and her face went grim. "That was my lawyer friend. Gerald's team just filed an emergency motion to have you committed. They're arguing you're a danger to yourself and others, that you need immediate psychiatric care. Can they do that? They can try. We have a hearing tomorrow morning. You'll need to testify to prove you're mentally competent." My hands started shaking. "How do I prove I'm not what he says I am?" "By being yourself. By telling the truth." Dorothy squeezed my hand. "And by having all of us stand with you." That afternoon, the other women started arriving at Dorothy's house. First came Susan Palmer, the woman from the first restraining order. She was in her early 60s, thin and nervous, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. "He destroyed my credit," she told me. "Took out loans in my name, then disappeared the money. When I tried to report it, he had documentation that I'd authorized everything. Forged signatures, but perfect forgeries. I couldn't prove they weren't mine." Margaret Hayes arrived next, a heavy-set woman with kind eyes. "He isolated me from my children," she said. "Told them I was becoming paranoid, that I was making up stories about him. By the time I got away, My own kids wouldn't speak to me. It took me 3 years to rebuild those relationships. One by one, they shared their stories. Different details, but the same pattern: marriage, control, isolation, theft, destruction. Gerald was a predator who'd perfected his technique over decades. And now we all stood together, ready to fight back. The hearing the next morning was brutal. Gerald's lawyers painted me as a confused, possibly delusional woman who'd married their client during a manic episode. They presented the forged medical records, had Dr. Hayes testify about my supposed dementia diagnosis. Dr. Hayes sat in the witness box and lied smoothly. Mrs. Whitmore showed clear signs of cognitive decline, memory loss, paranoia, confusion about basic facts. I diagnosed her with early-stage Alzheimer's disease. But our lawyer, a sharp woman named Grace Torres, who was working pro bono, tore into him on cross-examination. Dr. Hayes, when exactly did you examine Mrs. Whitmore? He consulted his notes. September 15th. And where did this examination take place? My office. Grace smiled. Strange. Mrs. Whitmore has phone records showing she was at the public library all day on September 15th, volunteering. Multiple witnesses can place her there. So when did you really examine her? He faltered. I may have the date wrong. May have? You're a doctor. Surely you keep accurate records, unless you never examined her at all. Unless you created a fake diagnosis at Mr. Whitmore's request. The judge intervened before Hayes could answer, but the damage was done. Doubt had been planted. Then it was my turn to testify. I sat in the witness box, looking out at the courtroom. Gerald sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, his face the picture of concerned husband. But his eyes were cold, calculating. I told my story. All of it. How we met, how he'd seemed kind at first, how the control had gradually tightened, the locked drawer, the restraining orders, the isolation, the drugged tea. I presented the papers I'd taken from the safe, explained what they proved. Gerald's lawyer tried to make me seem confused. Isn't it possible you misunderstood, that you misinterpreted innocent documents? I looked at the jury. I'm 67 years old. I've lived through a husband's death, raised a son, survived difficult times. I know the difference between being confused and being controlled. I know the difference between forgetfulness and being deliberately drugged. And I know the difference between a man who loves you and a man who wants to own you. The courtroom was silent. Then Dorothy took the stand and presented her 2 years of investigation. Susan, Margaret, and the others testified about their experiences. The pattern was undeniable, but Gerald's lawyers were good. They attacked every witness, found tiny inconsistencies in years-old memories, suggested the women were conspiring together, claimed Dorothy had manipulated us all. The hearing lasted 3 days. At the end, the judge ruled, I find insufficient evidence to support immediate commitment, he said. However, I'm ordering a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation by an independent doctor not affiliated with either party. We'll reconvene in 30 days. It was a partial victory. I wasn't being locked away immediately, but I wasn't free either. The evaluation could still go against me, and Gerald was still out there, still dangerous. As we left the courthouse, Gerald's lawyer stopped me in the hallway. My client would like to offer a settlement, he said smoothly. Annulment of the marriage, $50,000 for your trouble, and we all go our separate ways. No more legal action on either side. I looked at him in disbelief. So he can just move on to his next victim? The lawyer shrugged. Or you can keep fighting and risk losing everything. Your choice. I chose to fight. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated. Gerald's legal team filed motions, demanded depositions, buried us in paperwork. He was using his money to wage a war of attrition, trying to exhaust our resources and our will. Dorothy and I worked around the clock, gathering more evidence, finding more victims. We discovered 2 more women he'd targeted, bringing the total to 8. 8 women whose lives he'd tried to destroy. But Gerald fought back hard. He had private investigators following us, photographing us, looking for anything to use against us. He filed complaints against Dorothy's PI license. He sued Susan for defamation. He was attacking on every front. Then, 2 weeks before the psychiatric evaluation, Bradley called me. "Mom," he said, his voice strained. "Can we meet, please? I need to talk to you." We met at a coffee shop. Bradley looked terrible, dark circles under his eyes, his hands shaking as he held his cup. "Amanda left me," he said. "Took the kids to her mother's. Said I'm a terrible husband and father, that I learned it from watching how I treated you." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "I'm the one who should be sorry." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I didn't believe you. I thought you were confused, that Gerald was just trying to help. But then I started really looking at him, at his story, and I found things. Articles about his first wife's death, court records from lawsuits. He's got a history, Mom, a history of hurting people." "I know," I said gently. "I should have protected you. Instead, I threw you out. I called you a burden. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You were dealing with your own problems. I forgive you." "Can I help now?" he asked. "With the case? I'll testify. I'll do whatever you need." Having my son's support meant everything, but Gerald's response was swift and vicious. Within days, Bradley received notice that he was being sued for harassment. Gerald claimed Bradley had threatened him, had made defamatory statements. It was complete fiction, but it cost Bradley thousands in legal fees just to defend against it. "This is what he does," Dorothy said. "He attacks anyone who stands against him. He makes it so expensive and exhausting to fight that people give up." "But we're not giving up," I said. The independent psychiatric evaluation came. A doctor named Angela Ross spent 6 hours with me, running tests, asking questions, observing. She was thorough and kind, and I answered everything honestly. A week later, her report came back. Mrs. Whitmore shows no signs of dementia, cognitive decline, or mental illness. She is articulate, intelligent, and demonstrates excellent memory and reasoning skills. Previous diagnosis appears to have been fraudulent. Victory. Finally, a clear victory. But Gerald's lawyers immediately attacked Dr. Ross's credentials, claimed she was biased, demanded a second evaluation by a doctor of their choosing. The legal battle dragged on. Weeks became months. We won some motions, lost others. Gerald remained free on bail, living in his mansion, plotting his next move. And then, on a cold morning in November, Dorothy called me with news. "We found her," she said. "Ruth's sister. Gerald's first wife's sister. She's been living in Oregon, and she's willing to testify. She has Ruth's diary from the months before she died. It documents everything, the abuse, the control, the fear, and she has photos Ruth sent her showing injuries. This could be the evidence we needed, not just to prove Gerald's pattern with wives 2 through 8, but to prove he'd killed wife number 1. We flew to Oregon to meet Caroline Jacobs, Ruth's sister. She was 71 years old, frail but fierce, and she'd been waiting 25 years for someone to believe her about what happened to Ruth. "He pushed her," Caroline said. holding Ruth's diary like a sacred text. She told me in her last phone call, said if anything happened to her, it was Gerald. And 3 days later, she was dead. Fell down the stairs. But Ruth was careful, athletic. She didn't just fall. "Why didn't you come forward before?" I asked gently. I tried, but Gerald's lawyers destroyed me on the stand, made me seem like a jealous sister making up stories. The police investigated briefly and closed the case, accidental death, and I had no proof beyond Ruth's words to me. But now you have her diary. Now I have her diary. And now he's done it to enough other women that maybe, finally, someone will believe us. We brought Caroline back with us. She met with our lawyers, agreed to testify, turned over Ruth's diary and all her evidence. Gerald's response was to file for divorce from me, claiming irreconcilable differences. It was a tactical move, trying to distance himself from me legally before the criminal case could fully develop. "Fine," I said. "Let him divorce me, as long as he goes to prison." The preliminary hearing for criminal charges was scheduled for December. Charges included fraud, theft, false imprisonment, and assault. The prosecutor's office had finally gotten involved after seeing the overwhelming evidence. But the night before the hearing, something happened that changed everything. I was staying at Dorothy's house, going over testimony notes for the morning, when someone started pounding on the door. Dorothy looked through the peephole, and her face went pale. "It's Brenda," she said, unlocking the door. Brenda stumbled in, crying, holding her phone. "He took them," she sobbed. "Gerald took my girls. They were walking home from school, and he just took them." "Did you call the police?" I asked, already reaching for my phone. "He said if I call police, I'll never see them again. He said I have to testify tomorrow that I lied, that I made everything up, that you forced me to lie about him. If I do that, he'll give them back." We called the police anyway. An Amber Alert went out. Gerald was violating his bail conditions by approaching a witness, by kidnapping children. They'd revoke his bail, arrest him. Except they couldn't find him. He'd disappeared, vanished with Brenda's 2 daughters, girls aged 9 and 12. His phone was off. His house was empty. His car was abandoned at the airport, but airline records showed he hadn't boarded any flights. He'd planned this, had an escape route ready. The hearing the next morning was postponed while police searched for Gerald and the girls. Days passed with no sign of them. Brenda was beside herself with worry and guilt. "This is my fault," she kept saying. "I should never have agreed to testify. I should have known he'd retaliate." "This is his fault," I corrected her. "Only his." A week after the kidnapping, Gerald's lawyer delivered a message. "My client is willing to return the children unharmed if all charges are dropped and all witnesses recant their testimony." The prosecutor refused. "We don't negotiate with kidnappers." But Brenda was crumbling. "Please," she begged. "I don't care about justice. I just want my babies back." I understood her desperation. But I also knew that if we gave in, Gerald would win. He'd keep doing this to other women, other families. Someone had to stop him. The break came from an unexpected source. Gerald's own arrogance. He couldn't resist. He had to call Brenda, had to gloat about having all the power. And when he did, the police traced the call. He was in a cabin in the Appalachian Mountains, 3 states away. The FBI raided the location and found Gerald with the 2 girls. They were physically unharmed, but terrified. Gerald was arrested on federal kidnapping charges. This time there was no bail. He was held in a federal detention center pending trial. The girls were returned to Brenda, and watching that reunion made all of us cry. She held them so tight, sobbing, promising she'd never let anyone hurt them again. With Gerald in custody, the criminal trial moved forward quickly. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence now. 8 women testifying to a pattern of abuse, financial records, forged documents, Ruth's diary, and now, federal kidnapping charges. Gerald's defense tried everything, claimed the women were lying, claimed the diary was fabricated, claimed he was being persecuted by a conspiracy of vindictive ex-girlfriends and an overzealous investigator. But the evidence was too strong, the pattern too clear. I testified for 4 hours, told the jury everything, from the moment Bradley had threatened me with a nursing home to finding the safe to being drugged and controlled. I looked at Gerald the whole time, and he stared back with pure hatred. "Your Honor," his lawyer said during cross-examination, "my client loved this woman. He married her, welcomed her into his home, tried to care for her, and she's repaying him by destroying his life with lies." I turned to the jury. "Love doesn't lock you in your room. Love doesn't drug your tea. Love doesn't forge medical records to have you committed. What Gerald Whitmore felt for me wasn't love. It was ownership. And when I tried to leave, he would rather have destroyed me than let me go." The other women testified. Susan, Margaret, Caroline speaking about her sister Ruth, Dorothy explaining her 2-year investigation, Brenda describing the kidnapping, Bradley admitting how Gerald had manipulated him into doubting his own mother. The evidence was overwhelming. But Gerald's lawyers were expensive and clever. They created doubt wherever they could. They delayed and maneuvered and objected. The trial stretched on for weeks, and then, finally, closing arguments. The prosecution stood and addressed the jury. "This man is a predator. For over 2 decades, he has targeted vulnerable women, married them, controlled them, stolen from them, and destroyed their lives. He drugged Mrs. Whitmore to make her seem mentally ill. He forged documents to have her committed. When witnesses came forward to stop him, he kidnapped children. This is not a man who made mistakes. This is a calculated, methodical abuser who believes his money puts him above the law. Prove him wrong," Gerald's lawyer countered. "My client is a successful businessman who has been targeted by bitter ex-girlfriends and a disturbed woman with dementia. Every relationship has problems. That doesn't make someone a criminal. The prosecution hasn't proven criminal intent, only misunderstandings and coincidences. My client deserves the presumption of innocence." The jury deliberated for 3 days. 3 agonizing days where I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, could only wait. And then the verdict came. Guilty. Guilty on all counts. Fraud, theft, false imprisonment, assault, and federal kidnapping. The courtroom erupted. Gerald's face went white. His lawyers immediately began talking about appeals, but it didn't matter. He was convicted. Finally, after decades of destroying women, someone had stopped him. At sentencing, the judge looked at Gerald with disgust. "You are a danger to society," he said. "You have systematically preyed upon vulnerable women for your entire adult life. You have shown no remorse, no recognition of wrongdoing, only anger at being caught. I am sentencing you to 23 years in federal prison." Gerald would be 90 years old before he'd be eligible for parole. His life of privilege and predation was over. As they led him out of the courtroom in chains, he looked at me one last time. His mouth moved, forming words only I could see. "This isn't over." But it was. Finally, it was over. The months after Gerald's conviction were strange. I kept expecting him to somehow escape, to come after me again, to use his money and connections to overturn the verdict. But he didn't. He couldn't. He was locked away in a federal prison, and for the first time in over a year, I could breathe freely. The financial aftermath took time to untangle. Gerald had hidden assets, complicated trusts, offshore accounts, but forensic accountants worked through it all, and eventually his victims received restitution. Not everything we'd lost, but enough to rebuild our lives. I took my share, money Gerald had stolen from me during our brief marriage, and I did something I'd been planning since the trial ended. I started a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping elderly victims of financial and psychological abuse. I named it Ruth's House, after Gerald's first wife, the woman whose death had started his decades-long crime spree, the woman who'd tried to tell people and wasn't believed. I wanted her name to mean something other than tragedy. Dorothy became my partner in the organization. Her investigation skills, combined with my personal experience, made us an effective team. We provided legal aid, safe housing, advocacy, and support groups for people escaping abusive situations. The other victims, Susan and Margaret and the rest, joined our board of directors. We met monthly to review cases, to help new women navigate the terrifying process of leaving their abusers. We turned our collective pain into purpose. Brenda came to work for us as a case manager. She understood better than anyone how abusers used financial control and threats to keep their victims compliant. Her daughters, recovered from their ordeal, became volunteers, helping with outreach and education. Even Bradley got involved. My son, who'd treated me so terribly that day when he told me to get a job or go to a nursing home, became one of our biggest supporters. He donated money, volunteered his time, and spoke at events about how he'd failed to see his own mother's danger. His marriage to Amanda had ended, but he was working on being a better father and a better man. One afternoon, he came to visit me at my small apartment. I'd chosen to live simply, independently. No mansion, no luxury, just a clean, safe space that was entirely my own. "Mom," he said, sitting at my kitchen table. "I know I've apologized before, but I need to say it again. What I said to you that day, about the nursing home, about getting a job, it was cruel. You'd been taking care of my family for 3 years, and I treated you like you were worthless. I poured us both coffee. You were stressed, overwhelmed. You didn't know what Gerald was planning. That doesn't excuse it." He looked down at his hands. "Amanda used to say I talked to you the same way Dad did, like you were a servant instead of a person. I didn't want to see it, but she was right. I learned it from him, and I kept doing it. I'm sorry, Mom, I'm so sorry." I reached across and squeezed his hand. "You're learning. That's what matters. You're becoming the man you want to be, not the man you were raised to be. Because of you," he said. "Because you showed me what real strength looks like. You didn't let Gerald destroy you. You fought back." "We fought back together," I corrected. "Me and Dorothy and 8 other women and Brenda and you and so many others. That's the lesson, Bradley. We're stronger together." Ruth's house grew quickly. Within 6 months, we'd helped 23 women escape abusive situations. Within a year, we'd expanded to 3 locations. Survivors reached out to us from across the country, sharing their stories, asking for help. We lobbied for legislative changes, better protections for elderly abuse victims, stronger oversight of mental health commitments, laws specifically addressing coercive control, the psychological manipulation Gerald had used so effectively. Some of our proposals passed. Others are still being debated, but we're making progress. 1 year after Gerald's sentencing, I was invited to testify before the state legislature about elder abuse. I stood at the podium and told my story to a room full of lawmakers. I explained how easily I'd been isolated, controlled, nearly destroyed, and I explained what needed to change. A woman in her 60s or 70s isn't helpless, I said. We've lived full lives. We've raised families, built careers, survived loss and hardship. We have wisdom and experience. But our society treats us as if we're fragile and incompetent. And predators like Gerald Whitmore exploit that perception. They tell everyone their victim is confused, is forgetful, is losing her mind. And people believe it because we're conditioned to doubt elderly women. We need laws that protect us. We need systems that believe us. We need a society that values our voices instead of silencing them. The committee voted to move forward with several of our proposals. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. Patricia, my old friend from before Gerald, reconnected with me. We had lunch once a week, talking about books and life and healing. She admitted that Gerald had intercepted her calls, had told her I didn't want to hear from her. She'd been heartbroken, thinking I'd abandoned our friendship. I could never abandon you, I told her. You were one of the few people who saw me as a whole person, not just as someone's mother or someone's wife. That meant everything. 2 years after Gerald's conviction, I received a letter from him. It came from the federal prison, his handwriting on the envelope. I almost threw it away without reading it. But Dorothy convinced me to open it, to see what he had to say. The letter was 3 pages long, but it wasn't an apology. It was a justification. Gerald wrote about how the women he'd married had taken advantage of him, how they'd deserved what happened to them. He claimed I'd manipulated the jury, that he was the real victim. He said when he got out, he'd rebuild his life, and everyone would see the truth. I read it once, and then I burned it. His words had no power over me anymore. Caroline, Ruth's sister, became a close friend. She flew out to visit several times a year, and we'd spend hours talking about Ruth, about survival, about justice. She said that seeing Gerald convicted had finally given her peace after 25 years of guilt and grief. I should have fought harder for her, Caroline said one afternoon as we sat in my garden. I should have made someone believe me. You did fight, I told her. You tried, but one person can't fight a system designed to doubt them. It takes many of us, standing together, refusing to be silenced. That's what stopped him. Not one of us alone, but all of us together. Ruth's house expanded again. We opened locations in 4 more states. We trained advocates, lawyers, social workers. We created educational programs for families, helping them recognize signs of elder abuse. We built a network of support that stretched across the country. And every time we helped someone escape, every time we stood with a victim in court, every time we changed a law or educated a community, I thought of that day in Bradley's living room. The day he told me to get a job or go to a nursing home. The day that had seemed like the worst moment of my life. That day had led me to Gerald, yes, and Gerald had nearly destroyed me. But fighting Gerald had led me to Dorothy, to the other survivors, to Ruth's house, to this purpose. My suffering had meaning now. My survival had power. I was no longer Anahi, the invisible widow living in her son's house. I was no longer Anahi, the victim of Gerald Whitmore's abuse. I was Anahi, founder of Ruth's house. Anahi, advocate for survivors. Anahi, the woman who'd faced down a predator and won. 3 years after Gerald's conviction, on a sunny afternoon in May, I stood in front of our newest Ruth's house location as we cut the ribbon. 50 people had gathered, survivors and supporters and volunteers. Dorothy stood beside me, and Brenda, and all 8 of Gerald's other victims. Bradley was there with his children, teaching them about standing up for what's right. Patricia was there, and Caroline, and dozens of women we'd helped over the years. I thought about Gerald, locked in his prison cell, furious that his carefully constructed system of abuse had been exposed and destroyed. I thought about Ruth, who'd died trying to escape him. I thought about all the women he'd hurt, and all the women he'd planned to hurt. And then I looked at the faces surrounding me, strong, brave, compassionate people who'd turned pain into purpose, who'd refused to let one man's cruelty define their lives, who'd built something beautiful from the ruins he'd left behind. I had learned something profound through this nightmare. For years, I'd believed I needed someone to save me. First, I'd relied on my husband until he died. Then I'd relied on Bradley until he threw me out. Then I'd thought Gerald would rescue me from loneliness and poverty. But salvation didn't come from someone else. It came when I saved myself, when I found those restraining orders and chose to investigate instead of ignore, when I faced the truth about Gerald instead of accepting his lies, when I reached out to Dorothy and Brenda and Bradley and everyone else who became part of stopping him, and the greatest power came when we all stood together. When 8 separate women, 8 victims who'd been isolated and told they were crazy, joined forces and refused to be silenced. When Brenda risked everything to help, despite her fear. When Dorothy channeled her grief into justice. When Bradley admitted his failures and chose to do better. Age doesn't make us helpless. Experience makes us dangerous to those who prey on us. And the greatest revenge isn't destroying our abusers. It's building something beautiful from the ruins they left behind. I'm 70 years old now. I live in a modest apartment. I volunteer 40 hours a week at Ruth's house. I have dinner with Bradley and my grandchildren twice a month, and we have honest, loving conversations where everyone's voice matters. I meet Patricia for lunch every Tuesday. I have purpose and friendship and freedom. Gerald Whitmore took a year of my life, but I've taken decades from him, not through vengeance, but through transformation. Every woman we help is a year subtracted from his legacy. Every law we change is a year added to our collective strength. Every survivor who speaks up is a year of proof that predators don't win forever. I smile more now than I have in years. Real smiles, not the forced cheerfulness I showed Bradley's family or the fearful compliance I showed Gerald. These are smiles of genuine peace, of hard-won wisdom, of solidarity with other survivors. Sometimes I think about that moment when the Mercedes pulled up and Bradley saw Gerald for the first time, how Bradley's jaw had dropped, how certain he'd been that I was making a mistake, marrying a stranger, leaving his house so abruptly. He was right that I was walking into danger, but he was wrong that I couldn't handle it. Because I survived. And more than that, I helped make sure Gerald could never do it to anyone else. That's what I want you to understand. If you're listening to this story and you recognize yourself in it, if you're being controlled, isolated, told you're too old or too confused or too broken to leave, you're not. You're stronger than they want you to believe, and you're not alone. Reach out. Tell someone. Keep telling people until someone believes you. Find others who've survived. Stand together. Fight back. It won't be easy. It will be terrifying and exhausting, and you'll want to give up 100 times. But you can survive. You can escape. You can rebuild. And you can transform your pain into something powerful. I did. And if a 67-year-old widow with nothing but a suitcase and the clothes on her back could face down Gerald Whitmore and win, then you can face down whatever you're fighting too. Now I want to hear from you. Have you or someone you love ever faced a situation where you felt trapped, controlled, or dismissed because of your age? How did you find the strength to stand up for yourself or help someone else? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories about resilience, survival, and standing up against injustice. And share this video with someone who needs to know they're not alone, that their voice matters, that it's never too late to fight back. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing survivors. Thank you for being part of a community that refuses to let predators win. May you always have the courage to stand up for yourself, the wisdom to recognize when you need help, and the strength to keep going even when it feels impossible. May you find your people, your purpose, and your peace, and may you never ever let anyone convince you that you're too old, too weak, or too broken to matter. You matter. Your voice matters. Your life matters. Take care of yourselves and each other.